Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia MS-20-V tutorial series. Today we're going to do the first of our preset deep dives, where I take one of the stock presets. I'm going to do this harp chord preset today, and I'm going to pull it to bits and show you in a real-world context how the synth works. Also going to touch on a couple of areas that we've not explicitly dealt with in the video series because I didn't think they warranted episodes in their own right. That's the effects and macro sections. If you're enjoying this series and you'd like to support my channel, please check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Enormous thanks to everybody who's signed up so far. It really means a great deal to me. Right then, here's the sound. Clearly something going on with the pitch there because we're hearing some sort of pitched interval. Also got that huge delay bounce on there, we'll have a look at that. Really interesting sound, and a nice one to kind of ease our way into the preset deep dives. Let's try to figure out what's going on. First thing that I want to approach is that very obvious pitch offset. If I play a single note, I'll play a C. You can see that the tuner is really unhappy about that note. I'll play a lower one. It actually settles down on deciding it's a G sharp. Really interesting as to why I'm playing a C, I shouldn't be hearing a G sharp. First thing that I'm going to do is turn oscillator 2 down. There's our C. Now I'll turn oscillator 2 up and 1 down. And now we get a D sharp. So that's 3 semitones higher than the note that I'm playing. And if we have a look on the tuner on oscillator 2, sure enough, 2.95 semitones above the played note is what oscillator 2 is doing. When you add a C and an E flat together, they form the major third and perfect fifth of an A flat chord. So the tuner is basically inferring that there's an A flat chord going on in the background here. There isn't. There's no fundamental, there's no A flat being played, but it's being confused into thinking so by the combination of those two notes. You can actually see whenever I play any individual key, you can see the 2 peaks of the original note plus the 3 semitone offset. It's quite interesting when you've got 2 offset pitches being played at the same volume. You kind of need to know that when you're writing your music because you can actually fit inside it. If I wanted to stick completely comfortably in the key of C minor, the only 4 notes that I would be able to play would be C, that's got a minor third interval above it, a D, that does as well, and an F and a G. Those 4 notes, the minor third above them, the note 3 semitones above them, is also in the key of C minor, whereas the other 3 notes in C minor don't have an equivalent note 3 semitones above. So when you have these tonal offsets, you need to decide, am I going to fit comfortably inside a given scale, or choose the scale to match those requirements? Or do you say, no, the thing that I'm going to play is going to deliberately have those chromatic tensions, and that's a fundamental part of it. So that little lick that I played at the start of the episode, when I was playing, that E isn't in the key of C minor if I wanted to say that I was in C minor, and there's actually no scale. There's a half tone, whole tone scale that describes all of the notes that that little phrase would have legally entitled me to play, but actually that's not how you think about these things. It's actually a chromatic scale. So super interesting kind of little side shoot by doing these deep dives. You kind of start thinking, personally, I start thinking about music in different terms and think, well, what is it I'm actually doing? I think pretty much everything about music's absolutely fascinating. So every opportunity I've got to think about things in a slightly new context, I usually jump on it and kind of wallow in my half-tone, whole-tone chromaticism. Anyway, let's crack on. Both of the filters are in use. We've got this 193 Hertz cutoff on the high filter, throwing away some of the lowest frequencies, and again the low pass filters set quite dull, 481 Hertz. Throwing all of that bright brash stuff away, so we've basically band passed to the centre of the thing. A couple of resonances, obviously that's colouring the sound, we don't need to explicitly have a look at that stuff. One of the pitch modulation knobs is at non-zero, so we need to have a look at that. Now it says envelope generator 1/external, So the first thing we need to do is have a look on the patch panel to see if anything's plugged in to the jack that this control corresponds to, because that's going to tell us which of these two things is causing the modulation. And if I hover over this knob, you can see the light behind the frequency jack lighting up, telling us that we do actually have an overridden connection. So it's got nothing to do with envelope generator 1. Don't get carried away thinking that these are the controls providing this modulation. They're not. This cable is actually coming from the internal patch panel VCA. So what's feeding it? What's feeding the control input of the VCA is the mod wheel. So we now know that we're going to get pitch modulation when we turn the modulation wheel up. Here's the mod wheel in the bottom left hand corner. I'll turn it up. There's my very fast pitch modulation. So the speed of the pitch modulation is coming from the modulation generator, and we can prove that with this cable over here, which patches down into the input of the VCA. So basically the mod generator is feeding into the VCA, and the output from this VCA is going to the frequency modulation jack. So we're basically oscillating the pitch up and down very quickly, and the amount of stuff that this thing is doing is controlled by the modulation wheel. Pull it back down, and that vibrato goes away. Got another modulation knob at non-zero. This time it's the low pass cutoff modulation. This time our options are possibly envelope generator 2 or the patch panel. Let's have a look at the patch panel. As I hover over that knob, you can see that the cutoff frequency jack is empty, and therefore we're dealing with the normal connection. So this cutoff modulation is coming from envelope generator 2. Envelope generator 2, as we know, is the thing that also determines the shape of the sound when we press a key. How quickly does it come in? How loud is it when we hold the key down? And how quickly does it disappear? All of those things are also controlling the low pass filter cutoff modulation. So let's have a play with that. There you can hear both the volume and the filter sweep as I mess with the attack time. So it's actually just a very fast decay with no attack. Just creating that tiny little filter sweep on every note, giving it a little bit of extra colour, an extra bit of dimension. And our sustain level is determining the level that filter's settling down at. This is its resting position. No release time, obviously. Envelope generator 1 has nothing to do in this preset, so we don't need to worry about it. Let's hop over to the effects panel. Not something we've explicitly dealt with yet, but we have to have a look here. We can see that the effects are turned on. And it should be pretty obvious that the effects are turned on because we've got a whopping big delay. All of those delay bounces are coming from this FX2 slot. Just bear in mind that this is FX2. We'll see this shortly when we have a look at the macros. So I'll turn it off. Now the delay's disappeared. Here's our reverb. Yep. And the other two effects are basically sound shapers. So this is a parametric EQ. Basically something that we can use these little circles to define the modulation curve that we want for our EQ. And we can see, I mean, I've messed with it now, but you can see quite clearly that we're accentuating the higher frequencies. Gets duller, sound gets duller when I turn that off. And compressors on keyboards is something that I've got a personal bugbear about. They don't usually have a very large part to play. In fact, it's more of a volume boost than anything, and it is actually providing quite a significant volume boost to the overall sound. But I always think it's a little bit pointless compressing a keyboard sound because, you know, it's synthesized by its very nature. It's not something that has the vagaries of an analog plucked instrument where you need to control these transients. The keyboard itself is capable of doing that kind of stuff, but I don't know, people love to put compressors on synthesizers. There you go. Now what I'm going to do is turn the delay back on but leave the reverb off so that we can hear that nice and clearly. And now it's time to have a look at the macro screen. So we get to this from the little settings cog. It's going to disappear behind my head. So I'll just drag the synth over a little bit. There we go. And in the macro tab of the settings page, we get to see that we have these 4 user-definable controls at the bottom of the synthesizer. They're called brightness, timbre, time and movement, but they can actually contain any kind of modulation information at all. This is the default that comes out of the box. If you double click on the name, you can rename it anything to anything that you want, and you can actually map any kind of modulation to these effects by basically pressing this learn button, and all of these purple knobs, basically whatever I turn now, it's going to add that thing to this particular macro knob. So it's a way that you can very easily route multiple different controls into one master control, this brightness control. When I turn it up, you can see 2 different things being done at the same time. I can then right click on that newly assigned parameter, a little delete option pops up, throw it away again. So the default on this particular preset, we can see that we've got brightness and movement dialed in. Here's our brightness control, and it's affecting the low pass filter cutoff frequency. So as I turn this thing up and down, you can see the low pass filter in the background being adjusted. If you drill into these options by pressing the little angle bracket, you have very fine control over the modulation envelope that applies to this thing. Simply by left clicking in the window, you can create these little modulation points, and you can right click to remove them again. It's actually a very powerful modulation engine. This is a common feature on most Arturia synths these days, but I'm sure you get the idea of what's going on. The movement control, you just basically click on whichever control you want to edit. This is the one that controls the FX2 dry wet. So basically, by changing this level, you can see me moving dry wet up and down. You can also see that even when I turn the movement knob to 100%, I never go past 50% on this particular control. That's because I've constrained the upper limit of my modulation amount over here in the modulation window. So no delay, and there's me dialing it in. So between the effects bank and the macro controls, you've got an awful lot of extra control over the sound of the synth. And in fact, if we turn the entire effects bank off, it's a much flatter, kind of less interesting sound, frankly. So that's it for our first preset deep dive. In the next one, I'll make the synth work a bit harder. We'll get something that's got a little bit more action going on in the patch panel and stretch ourselves a little bit. Thanks for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the like button if you did. I'll see you next time.